Good morning, Life Church. So there was this man, and he died, and he's standing before the gates of heaven. And St. Peter's there, and St. Peter's like, whoa, stop right there. To get through these gates, you need 100 points. And so the man looks at him and thinks, he says, tell you what, St. Peter, I have been faithful to my wife all my life. And Peter goes, well, that's 3 points. And I go, 3 points. Right, the things, all right, I have loved my 2 wonderful children. I've driven them to all of their sporting events. I paid for them through university. And whenever they've had a problem, I have been there for them. And Peter's like, well, that's good. That's another 3 points. He's like, 3 points. And so he goes and he thinks, he's like, okay. And I noticed, when me and my friends noticed, there's quite a few like homeless people around. And so once a week we set up a soup run, and we also had like blankets and sleeping bags that we gave out. And Peter's like, that's wonderful. That's another 2 points. And the man's like, 2 points. 2, 3, 3, 8 points. It's like, I'm never going to get to 100. It is only by the grace of God that I am going to get to heaven. And St. Peter looks at him and smiles and says, that answer is worth 100 points. You know, if there was anyone who knew that it was by the grace of God and the grace of God alone that you get to heaven, it was Peter, because he blundered and made mistakes again and again. And yet he knew that it was by God's grace he could follow Jesus. Anyway, so we're starting a new sermon series here at Life Church, and it's called Conversations with Jesus. And the first 4 in the series are all about Peter's interaction with Jesus. So today I have 3 points to share with you, and the first point is very similar to the introduction. Peter was imperfect, but he was committed to following Jesus, and that God used him through it. So I've been looking through my Bible at the different times where Peter made mistakes, and it was he didn't hide them, and there were quite a lot. So here we go, where the times where Peter blundered or made a mistake. So he stopped the little children from coming to Jesus. He was walking on water and then doubted and then started to sink. He got absolutely baffled by the parables. He rebuked Jesus for talking about the death and resurrection, and Jesus had to put him in his right place. He got into arguments about who was the greatest. Jesus asked him to pray with him, and yet he went and fell asleep. He told Jesus he would never deny Jesus, and that same week he denied him 3 times. He got discouraged after Jesus went back up to heaven and went back to a life of fishing and had to be redeemed. And then he was succumbed to peer pressure. He stopped eating with people who weren't Jews. You know, his life was full of blunders, much like ours. But yet, in spite of all this, he was one of Jesus's closest disciples and the man that Jesus chose to lead the early church. And you know, that is so encouraging for us, that despite of all the mistakes we make, God can still be at work inside of our lives. There's this song I love, it's by Hillsong, and it says, 1,000 times I fail, yet his mercy remains, and should I stumble again, I am caught in his grace. And I like to think that should that song have been around at the time of Peter in church, you would have heard one of the loudest voices when it came to that chorus, that it would have been Peter's. Sing it out loud, 1,000 times I failed, yet your mercy remains, and should I stumble again, Lord, I am caught in your grace. There's this other little bit I love in that story is that when Jesus tells Peter to come and follow him, Peter says, like, oh, away from me, like I am not clean, I am not worthy to do that. And I think we all experience that and sense that ourselves. But yet Peter went and he followed after Jesus. All right, now on to the second point. So we're going to backtrack and talk about the story a bit. And I actually came here to film on the beach. You're probably wondering why I'm in the car. And so here you can see the beach. It was a shoreline, much like this. This is Scottish coastline. And I just want you to imagine the story, okay? So you've had Peter has been fishing all night and he's not caught anything, okay? Then he comes and Jesus comes and there's this huge crowd. And Jesus asks to use Peter's fishing boat. And so Peter lets him, he preaches the crowd. And afterwards he's like, Peter, let's go out fishing. And Peter's like, A, I'm a fisherman and you're a carpenter. And B, I haven't caught anything all night. But because you say so, Lord, I'm going to do it. And he goes out and they catch a huge amount of fish. Now, was it a coincidence that Peter hadn't caught anything that night? I don't think so. And was the big fish catch like a tip from Jesus to say, thanks for letting me use your boat, here's a huge fish catch? I don't think so. Was this a demonstration of Jesus's power? Maybe to an extent, but I don't think that was the main reason, because Peter already knew Jesus could do miracles. He'd healed his mum a few chapters earlier. I think Jesus was making a point, and he often does this. He often uses life as a visual aid. And what was this point that Jesus was trying to make? My understanding is that Jesus was trying to show, later he says to Peter, I'm going to send you out to fish for men. And so my understanding is that this was a visual aid, that Peter, you're going to catch so many fish, you're going to win so many souls for Christ, and it's not because of your own doing, it's going to be by the power of Jesus, it's going to be by me at work, but I need you to trust me and to be obedient. This was a very powerful visual aid from Jesus. I remember one time I was in Senegal. I'd just been traveling through a number of kind of closed Muslim countries and had seen very few believers there. And I got to Senegal, and Senegal is a country where you have freedom of religion, but it's a Muslim country. And I was feeling really discouraged about the lack of believers inside of the country. And I was in church, and I was really grieved, and I was just on my knees praying and saying, God, I'm so discouraged that there's so few believers here. I pray that after so many years of people trying to win people for Christ in this region, that it would be like when the disciples went out fishing, that you would say, drop the nets, and there would be a huge harvest, and it wouldn't be man getting the glory, but the glory would go to Christ and to you alone. And as I prayed that, I just sensed the Holy Spirit inside of my heart, and that this was going to happen. And so I got up and sat ready, and the preacher got up to preach, and he preached on this exact passage that I'm preaching on now, Luke 5, 1-11. And for me, that was just absolute confirmation that we are going to see God at work, and it's not going to be by us or our strength, but it's going to be by God and his power, and the glory will go to him. And that was the message that Jesus wanted to get across to Peter. And did Peter see that fruit? Amen. He totally saw it. On Pentecost, it said 5,000 people came to believe in Christ. And that was a tip of the iceberg of what Peter saw, of people coming to Jesus. All right, so point number 1, Peter was imperfect, but he was committed to Jesus, and God used him mightily. Point number 2 is Jesus is going to bring in the big catch, and we need to be obedient and to drop those nets. We need to get out there and just speak about Christ and share about what he's done in our lives and trust Jesus that he's going to do the rest. And the last point is that Jesus is calling us to leave everything and to follow him. So Jesus tells Peter, come and follow me. And Peter, he leaves his nets, he leaves his boats, he leaves his family, he leaves his friends, he leaves the fish, and he comes and follows after Jesus. And it's not even a question, it's not even a hesitation. Jesus is so worth it that he goes. I love to read missionary biographies, and there's one I've just finished recently about C.T. Studd. For those who don't know him, he was in the 19th century. He was like a famous cricketer. He played for England, even beat Australia. He also was to be inheritance of a huge fortune from his family. But anyway, God called him to leave cricket and to go be a missionary in China. Against much opposition from his family, he went and did so joyfully. While he was there, he came of age to inherit this great fortune, and without hesitation, he gave it all away. Every penny he gave away. Then when he was 50, he'd seen some success, some harvest in the fields in China and in India. But for the most part, his health was absolutely deteriorated. The doctors wouldn't let him back onto the field, and he didn't have a penny to his name. And he was walking past a sign, and it said, "Cannibals want missionaries in the Congo." And he thought, that looks interesting. And so he went in, and someone was sharing about the need, and there was no Christian witness in this part of Africa. And so he decided to get on a boat, and without any terrible health and without any support, and he went to the Congo to proclaim about Jesus. And on that boat, God said, this isn't just letting the people of Congo know. This is going to start a movement for the evangelization of the world. Anyway, he got to Congo. He was only there 20 years, but saw, like Peter, just saw thousands and thousands and thousands of people come to know Jesus. And that step of faith started the WEC mission that has seen thousands of missionaries all across the world. Anyway, at the end of his life, CT says this: "My only joy, therefore, is that when God has given me work to do, I have not refused it." Anyway, so God is calling us, like Peter, all of us, to leave everything we have and just to follow after him, and to do so joyfully. Anyway, so those are the 3 points. So again, as a reminder, Peter was imperfect, but he wholeheartedly followed Jesus, and God used him mightily. Jesus is going to bring in the harvest, and we need to be obedient, and we need to drop those nets. And number 3, Jesus calls us to leave all and to follow him. There's this sign I love that fishermen put up on their cars or on their houses, and it says, "Gone fishing." And I hope all of us at Life Church will have those signs on our lives that say, "We've gone fishing."